Back at you. Another episode coming at you from chooseyourrelationships.com, author of Love Can't Wait, which can be found on amazon.com. My guest today, she guides women on the journey to embody their inner high priestess, a version of themselves that is ambitious and powerful, as well as open hearted and creative. She's on a mission to help women become deeply connected to their bodies, emotions, and sexuality and purpose. She also has a podcast that we're going to talk about today that I really love. And my guest today is Noto. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for taking time to do this. So where are you from originally?
Originally, I was born and raised between Florida and New York. So I was a baby that traveled a lot.
Wow. Okay. So the reason why I wanted to bring you on because first off, I love your podcast. I like what you're doing with women, and you talk about a lot of things that I don't hear. Not only women, but you just don't hear it within the mainstream media. So, how did you get started? How did you? I mean, I highly doubt that you woke up one day, or maybe you were in school and you said, "Hey, I want to do this when I get older." So, how did you get started on this journey?
Yeah, I think like so many other people who are in the world of transformational work, um, my knowing of the fact that I was going to do this work came from my own struggle. I struggled a lot throughout my life with effective communication, with understanding what I was feeling, why I was feeling it, with navigating my sexuality in a way that felt empowered and healthy. And so, as I went on my journey of struggling with those things, making my own mistakes, I started to recognize over time, okay, there's a better way to do this. There's a better way to communicate this. There's a better way to navigate this aspect of my identity that would feel more empowering. Well, if I think there's a better way, how do I do it? And surely, if I'm struggling with this, there must be other people that are struggling with this because I consider myself at least a half intelligent person. And so, if there's something that I'm not getting and there's something that I wasn't taught about sexuality, emotions, relationships, then I know everyone else is struggling with the same thing. And if I can overcome this, then why couldn't I help other people overcome some of these challenges within themselves as well? And, unfortunately, we're not given the handbook on love, as you know. We are all out here trying to figure it out. And with varying degrees of success, it blows my mind that we're not taught some of these things in school. But my journey was a very organic one, and it was making a lot of mistakes, learning from them, and figuring it out. And then recognizing I had skills that were different than most people had because I had struggled so much and because I really applied myself to learning about love, relationships, and sexuality. And that was a huge part what got me started on this path.
Yeah, it always seems like, for the most part, it seems like a lot of people have to go through something before they get to where they want to be at, or
Yeah.
or if where you see them at today, it wasn't always like that.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's like that, but it always seems like the people that you, I guess, a lot of people admired to be like them. They'd be like, hey, I wonder, I wonder what type of person they may be or whatever. But if they was to tell you their backstory of where
Hmm.
they came from, you might be. Most people would say, "No, I don't want to do that."
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. So, um, how do you? Uh, I think I saw your Instagram, and I think in one of your videos you were talking about how to have um how to make your sex life more dynamic, and that really got my attention because I think you know I think sex is very important,
Hmm.
and a lot of most of my followers are guys. It's probably 80% guys and 20% women,
Yeah.
but a lot of people are kind of passive when it comes to talking about sex because it's a very taboo subject,
Hmm.
and I think it's very important. It's a very important part of relationships. So why do you think people don't talk about it? Like why do you think it's kind of like people are just winging it or don't put too much effort into it? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think the topic of sex makes people very uncomfortable. And I say makes people, it doesn't make people do anything, but we have been so conditioned to pair sex with shame. Shame about our sexual desires, preferences, kinks, curiosities, shame about performance, particularly for men. I think there's so much pressure on the shoulders of men to perform a certain way during sex, to have it all figured out, to know exactly what feels good for her at every single point in her cycle, at every age, I think some of those things aren't talked about enough. In working with a lot of male clients, I have heard over the years that there are just undue amounts of pressure, all sorts of narratives that men carry on their shoulders around sex, around performance, around size, shape, everything, right? There are so many pressures that men carry that are unique to men and that women carry that are unique to women. And because so many of us got our quote unquote formal sex education from porn, from magazines, from what we heard our friends talking about when we were in high school and exploring, from what our parents told us to do or not do when we were exploring sexuality early in our lives. uh, we have a really misconstrued understanding around the potentiality of what sex can be. And our understanding right now as a society is so limited, from it only being a thing for procreation, and for it only being a thing for certain relationship constructs. And so I think a lot of people are carrying a lot of shame around sex, and I think it's not something that's been normalized in our society, so we don't talk about it. We don't know how to talk about it. We haven't been taught how to navigate the sensations and emotions that come up around the topic of sex. And so, again, we're left to kind of figure it out. And in my opinion, as I've explored this in my personal life and in my work, there's so much potential for what sex can be. And that's where that video came from that you saw, which is, for most of my own life sexually, I thought that I, as a woman, had to show up the way women did in porn, that my body needed to look that way, that I needed to make the same sounds, that I needed to always be desirable, always be fit, clean, manicured, made up, with cute outfits. And it seems trivial and ridiculous, but there are these narratives that we as well carry as women, in thinking that we always have to be desirable to the male gaze, and that there's no other way for us to be and still be worthy or worth something. And so carrying a narrative like that causes us to show up in a very constricted way during sex. Because if I think I am out of line with the narrative or the idea that I have around how I think I should be or need to be desired by my male partners, and if I'm not showing up in alignment with that, then I lose presence. I'm in my head. I'm engaged in performance anxiety, just as men are. And it completely takes the presence out of sex. And in many ways, there's this limited range that we can be in during those kinds of sexual experiences. And it does not at all allow for the vast range of emotions that we have, for sex to be tender, for sex to be sweet, for sex to be emotional, for sex to be awkward, for sex to be something about self-discovery. It is not always the way it looks in porn. And in fact, more times than not, it is not that way. When it is, great, awesome. That
Yeah.
can be a fun time too. And I think people are really under the impression that there isn't much outside of that, or the sort of um, vanilla routine that they have found themselves in. And there's so much more beyond that that sex can bring us to.
Yeah, I mean, porn can be very misguided. I mean, some of that stuff that they be doing, I'm like, this is just this is ridiculous. I mean, even if even if you're a guy and you try to be like a jackhammer, like you're gonna burn out, bro. You can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
and and the environment that we live, it doesn't support what you teach and what you talk about on your podcast. I think in this society that we live in order to, I guess, um, have like peace of mind or have a sense of self, you have to kind of detach and you have to really go in the opposite direction of how everyone else is thinking and what everyone else is doing. And even that within itself can be a struggle because you get ridiculed, you get shamed, you get your name called. So it's very difficult to be doing just simple things outside of the norm in this society. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think we're at a very unique time in history right now, arguably one of the most interesting times to be alive, where more than ever before there is a space and many platforms for us to do things differently. And I think it's conversations like this and the work that people like us are doing in the world that are really starting to open people's eyes to the fact that there are other ways outside of the conventional paradigm to operate.
Yeah. So how did you get started? How did you get started? What inspired you to do the podcast?
I've always enjoyed speaking.
Okay.
I love having conversations with people. I love asking meaningful questions. And I love being in conversations where everyone leaves feeling better than they did when they started. And if there were any intention for my podcast, it's to leave my guests feeling seen, heard, acknowledged, expressed, which is one of the cornerstones of my work, is self-expression, and to have conversations that leave a mark on the world, that leave a positive impact on the world, and that can help to normalize some of these topics that have otherwise been considered taboo. Sex, sexuality, relationships, communication. I really aim with the podcast to have conversations that people either aren't having or people aren't having enough of, and doing so in a way that feels casual and laid back, but that still informs and leaves people with new information.
So what type of responses have you gotten?
Well, actually, I'm about to kick off a new season of the podcast, which I'm really excited for. I don't know if you've ever seen Red Table Talks. Jada Pinkett Smith
Yeah.
hosts them. Okay, so she basically just gathers women around a red table and they have real conversations. And so this next season on the podcast, I'm going to be gathering women for the show, both in person and virtually, and just acting like we're best girlfriends kicking it around a table or on a couch in someone's living room and having deeply meaningful conversations, but in a way that takes down the barrier of it needing to be so academic and teachy, right?
Yeah.
I am having experts on the podcast who are experts in their field of love, sex, and relationships. But what I'm also doing on the podcast this season is asking them about their personal lives. So if you're a woman that's coming on the podcast and we're talking about love, sex, and relationships because she's a coach in that area, great. Well, what is your love and sex life like? Where have you struggled? Where have you had your biggest breakthroughs? Tell us about the person behind the success, behind the business. And I want to be having real conversations with powerful women like that because, I think we're at a pivotal time in history where we are hearing women's voices in a different way. And I want to be a platform that provides a space for women to have those conversations in a way that's not taboo, but that's rather normal.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, I've been following you for about probably like 2 months, 2 or 3 months, right? Now, correct me if I'm wrong. At one point, before the pandemic, you're kind of like a nomad, right? At one
Mm-hmm.
point. So
Yeah.
how did the how has the pandemic affected you as far as just doing your everyday routine thing?
I would say the pandemic really shook shit up for me. So before COVID popped off, I was a New Yorker, and my partner and I lived there. And when we decided to leave New York to what we thought we were going to travel, but obviously COVID had other plans for us, um, we left everything behind. I left an entire world I knew, a line of work that I knew, clients that I knew, a place that I knew, an apartment that I knew. And the idea for me at the time was very exciting. Like, who doesn't get excited by the fact that they're going to leave their life behind, toss all their stuff, and like go travel the world with their new partner?
Woo-hoo!
Yeah, it was very, very exciting
Yeah,
in theory.
yeah.
And what I found is that it kicked everything up for me. Like, all of my deepest insecurities, all of my fears, all of the things that were hidden underneath the nicely organized lid that I had emotionally and psychologically, all of that just got completely torn up. And I'll say that, it wasn't the pandemic itself that was particularly challenging, but it was the fact that I had left this very familiar, very comfortable life to go do something radically different
Mm,
in a new relationship. And so it was kind of like, when it rains, it pours. Everything changed at once. And it was by design, but I didn't realize how fundamentally destabilizing that would be for me. And so when I say that all of a sudden I went from being in a very manageable relationship to all of my stuff, like all my shit being on the table, and not being able to hide from any of my tendencies, any of my emotions, any of my like anger, defensiveness, all the qualities that I never wanted to get from my mother that I actually got from my mother, everything came out. And it was a rude awakening for me. Like, I had worked so hard my whole life to be this idea of what I thought a perfect woman was, who
mhm.
was intelligent, well spoken, um, presented well, who everyone thought had her shit together. And that period of time proved to me that I couldn't hide behind the facade anymore. I felt in many moments over the last 2 years completely obliterated, completely just like torn to shreds, as if I had completely lost the identity that I had worked so hard to create my whole life. And I will say that these last 2 years have been the most challenging for me in all of my years of life, through breakups, through health challenges, through deaths in the family. These past 2 years were the most challenging. And it was, I'll also say it was also the most liberating, because
Yeah,
now I don't feel like I have to hide anymore. I don't feel like I have to work so hard to keep this identity together. And now I just get to be whoever the heck I want. And so now I have a blank slate on which to do my artwork, if you will.
yeah. I think a lot of people can relate to that, but me
Yeah.
personally, I think the pandemic it was like a nightmare for somebody like me because I'm a very social person. I like being around people naturally, but if you're gonna tell me that I'm just supposed to stay inside and just only place I can go to is the store, if oh, what am I? That's not me. And plus, on top of that, I think when I started hearing about the restrictions, like if you want to travel anywhere, you gotta be, you gotta take the PCR test, or
Hmm.
You gotta be quarantined. I'm like, oh my goodness. So I think a lot of that had to do with how it's just the restrictions within itself, is what I really had a problem with. And I'm not saying I have to go somewhere, but I would like to have the option to go somewhere.
Yeah.
I think I think that was tough for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it was tough on a lot of people's relationships as
Yeah.
well, because now all of a sudden we're quarantined with the person that we spend a lot of time with already, but not this much time. And so I saw one of two things happened. People's relationships strengthened or they fell apart.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a tough situation, and we're still not really out of it. Things are getting better
Yeah.
slowly but surely, I guess.
I'm not sure that we're ever going to see, like, we're never going to go back to the time that we were in before.
Oh
And
no.
I think there's a period, I'm not sure how aware people are of that things will never be the same. And I think it's important for us to go through, our own and a collective grieving process for what was that will never be again. It's just
Yeah.
a part of the cycles of life. And we are in a completely new paradigm, in a new time, in a new way of life now that I think we're all doing our best to get adjusted to. And it's new. We're literally, just like with love, sex, and relationships, we're figuring it out as we go because we don't know how to do any of this.
Yeah. It's like a reset. I think one
Yeah.
thing a lot of the single people, I think they kind of got a wake up call because the people are they're not moving as fast as they normally would as far as meeting a new person. People are kind of taking their time now. They're like, hey, let's just slow down. Let's take it. let's,
Yeah.
meet, let's meet out in a park
Let's
somewhere.
do a Zoom date first before we
Yeah,
meet in person.
yeah. So I think a lot of people are kind of like, hey, that's just no rush. Regardless of how they feel too. Hey, no rush.
Yeah,
Just take
yeah.
it slow and see where it goes. You know. So I think those are some of the positives. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if so where do you see your podcast and what you're doing? Where do you see it going in the near future?
My vision for the podcast as a platform and for my work is really to be a leader in the world who shows women back to who they are as sensual beings. And by sensual, I don't necessarily mean sexual, though sexuality can absolutely be included in that. But
Yeah.
the work that I do in the world, in my own personal life and with the women that I work with, is showing women back to their emotions, back to their expression, back to their sense of deep enjoyment and embodiment. How can we, as women, rewrite the paradigm for how we show up in the world as feminine beings who can equally be badasses in the world and get shit done, but also go slow? Also, know that it's safe to surrender and relax into ourselves and into our relationships. And so, I see the podcast being a platform for radical self expression around intimacy, love, sexuality. And I see the podcast being a platform that brings women together to talk about those topics and to normalize these topics. And then I see my work in the world really being work that's guided by pleasure, sensuality, self expression, and showing women that it's safe for us to express and to be in those aspects of our identity without it needing to be misconstrued, but that we can be sovereign beings in our sensual expression, in our sexual expression, and nothing has to come of it. That is ours and ours alone. And should we choose to share that with people, great, so be it. May it be consensual and full of pleasure. And if not, then it's something that we get to own and have agency over in a way that feels empowering for us.
Great. So, what does becoming a high priestess mean? Because a lot of people will hear that and be like, "Oh, that sounds like some woo woo stuff." What does that really mean?
Yeah. So when I first started studying the high priestess archetype and creating what that meant for me in my life, the high priestess to me is this integrated woman, this woman who can operate on her own full spectrum of masculinity, of femininity, of being out there in the world, going, fulfilling a purpose and a mission, and of being the woman who can completely kick back, relax, surrender, and be led by someone. I think we're really working out of paradigms where, in order for a woman to be successful, she has to be like a man. And that's not how we're built. It's just not how most of us are built. And so, how can we operate in a world where it's safe and encouraged that we go out and we be owners of our businesses and that we be C-suite executives and all of that? And also, how can we also be in a world where we know it is safe for us to surrender and to be led by our male partners, to surrender into being led in the bedroom, to being led in emotionally. And so it is this full spectrum woman who has done the inner work to stand in her truth and stand in her strength, and also stand and surrender in her vulnerability and in her emotional expression, and know that that is equally as strong and powerful as is being the outspoken woman on the soapbox. And so it's this woman who can really strike her whole range of emotions, of expression, and there's no one way that she has to be, but that she allows herself to be all of the ways in any moment that that particular way feels good for her.
Yeah, that's great. I think a lot of women don't understand the influence and impact that they have. Even some of the women I know personally, they they don't understand how they impact me. They don't. It's and even if I sometimes I'll say little things here and there or whatever, and they kind of like, well, okay. It's kind of like they just don't know they don't know how to take it. It's like, I don't, because the environment has a lot to do with it. Their daily routines, their jobs, and the whole situation that we're in. So I think the way it's going now in this society is going to be very difficult. For a lot of women, because I see a lot of women are, when they're at that job, corporate job that they might have, and when they come home, they can't shut it off. They can't shut
Yeah.
off, that, because when they're at the job, they rule with an iron fist most of the time.
Yeah.
So when they get home, it's very difficult for a lot of women to turn that off.
Yeah, there's when and I know because I was one of those women, especially when I was in the corporate world in New York. Um, and I didn't understand why I was scaring men away. I thought, I'm a good-looking woman who's in shape, who takes care of herself. Why can't I keep a man around? And it was because I had a lot of masculine energy. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing bad about it. My masculine energy helped me get shit done.
Yeah.
I was direct, I was focused, I was organized, I was analytical, and those are skills that benefit us in certain areas of our lives.
Yeah.
And when it comes to love and relationships, there is something that is differently required of us as women than there is in the workplace. And having the ability to make the distinction is really, really important if we want to be in a relationship that has passion, spark, sexual chemistry. Because if you have two poles of a magnet that are coming together and they're both north poles, they're going to repel each other. So if you have two masculine forces that are coming together in a relationship where both people are trying to lead and direct, both people are trying to be the organizer, the linear figure in the relationship, then there's going to be a repulsion that happens. There isn't going to be the kind of gentle or passionate sexual chemistry that I think so many of us really desire in relationships. And in working with a lot of women, our deepest desire, and I can't say this is true for all women, but generally speaking, many women's deepest desire is to surrender. And it's unfortunate that surrender has been equated with weakness, because it is not weak at all. Surrender is probably the thing that takes the most courage, the most trust and faith and inner strength than any other act I have ever seen in love and relationships. And we desire to surrender, but what needs to happen first for women to be able to show up in the world and in relationships is for us to feel safe. And that is, I think, equally the responsibility of ourselves to ensure that we are doing the inner work that it takes to feel emotionally, sexually, and psychologically safe within ourselves as individuals. But there's also a really important charge for men in relationships with women as well, to know how to be the kind of figure that helps to create a safe space, both for himself and for his female partner. And that's the core of some of the most important relational work, in my opinion, is how do we create deep fundamental levels of safety for ourselves and for our partners, whether we identify as a man or a woman, because that's where all the magic and juice comes from. You want to talk about having sexual chemistry and having great sex for years to come, even when you've been married for 20 years, there has to be equally a combination of deep safety and polarity, which is somebody plays the masculine role and somebody plays the feminine role, so there are opposite charges that can stay in attraction with each other.
Yes. So if people wanted to work with you or follow you, where would they go to?
Best place to connect with me is on my Instagram, which is at @leenoto_, LEENOTO, and then my website, leenoto.com.
So there you have it. All links will be found in the show notes. If you follow me on my podcast or YouTube, tell me what you think. Until next time, we out. Peace.